I stood at the podium, gripping the edges until my knuckles turned white. My father's casket sat just feet away, covered in white roses that seemed too perfect for someone who'd lived such an imperfect life. I'd practiced my eulogy 100 times in front of the bathroom mirror, but now the words kept catching in my throat like broken glass. Through my tears, I looked up at the crowded chapel, searching desperately for comfort in familiar faces. That's when I saw her. She stood at the back, near the heavy wooden door, half hidden by the shadow of an oak pillar. But I saw her clearly enough, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Same dark hair falling in waves past her shoulders, same angular jaw, same hazel eyes that seemed to catch the light the exact same way mine did. It was like looking into a mirror, except the mirror was alive and breathing and staring right back at me with the same shocked expression I must have been wearing. My voice faltered mid-sentence. The chapel fell deathly silent. Everyone turned in their seats to see what had stopped me, confusion rippling through the crowd like a wave spreading across still water. My mother's hand clamped around my wrist like a vice. The pain shot up my arm, sharp and sudden and clearly meant to control me. "Don't make a scene," she hissed through clenched teeth, her smile never wavering for the watching crowd of mourners. But I couldn't look away from the woman. Our eyes locked for just a moment that stretched into eternity. Then she turned and slipped out the back door, disappearing like smoke into the winter air, leaving me with nothing but questions. My name is Vero, and that was the day I realized my life wasn't mine. That was the day everything I thought I knew shattered into a million pieces I'd never be able to put back together the same way. After the service ended, I stumbled outside into the cold afternoon air, gasping like I'd been held underwater for too long. My legs felt weak, my mind spinning in circles that led absolutely nowhere. People offered their condolences, touching my shoulder, squeezing my hand, speaking words that sounded like they were coming from underwater. I barely heard any of them. All I could think about was her face. My face. A complete stranger wearing my features like a mask she'd stolen. I found my aunt standing near the parking lot, smoking a cigarette even though she'd quit years ago after a serious health scare. Her hands shook visibly as she brought it to her lips, and I noticed ash falling onto her black coat like snow. "Who was that woman?" I asked. My voice came out raw, desperate, nothing like the composed eulogy voice I'd been using inside the chapel just minutes before. She looked away quickly, exhaling smoke that curled in the cold air. "Vero, honey, today isn't the day for this conversation. Not here." "Who was she?" I demanded, louder this time, not caring who might overhear. My aunt's eyes filled with tears that she blinked away rapidly. She dropped the cigarette and crushed it under her heel, grinding it into the pavement like she wished she could grind away this whole conversation. "Her name is Tessa," she finally whispered, glancing around nervously to make sure no one else could hear us. "And this isn't the first time she's been around here." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, stealing what little breath I had left in my lungs. Back at our house, relatives filled every room like water flooding a sinking ship. They balanced paper plates of casserole and potato salad, speaking in those hushed funeral voices that somehow managed to fill every corner with uncomfortable silence. The air smelled like coffee and lilies, and something else I couldn't quite name. Something that felt like fear hanging thick and invisible between all of us. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, watching, listening carefully, catching fragments of conversations that died the very moment I got too close. Whenever I approached a group of older relatives, they'd stop talking mid-sentence. They'd pat my hand with pitying expressions and change the subject to the weather or the food or anything except what I desperately needed to know. My mother held court in the living room, accepting sympathy with practiced grace that looked almost rehearsed, like she'd been preparing for this performance her whole life. She looked absolutely perfect as always. Hair neat in an elegant bun, makeup subtle but flawless, black dress pressed without a single visible wrinkle. She could have been posing for a magazine about how to be the perfect grieving widow. I finally caught her alone for just a moment in the narrow hallway between the kitchen and living room. "Mom, there was a woman at the funeral who looked exactly like me. Aunt Claire said her name was Tessa." My mother's face went pale, then pink, then hard as stone in the space of about 3 seconds. "Your aunt talks too much and always has. She needs to learn to mind her own business. Who is she? I pressed, not letting her escape. No one important, my mother snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Then she caught herself, smoothing her expression back into something softer, more socially acceptable. Just someone who wanted to pay respects. Drop it, Vero. Today isn't the day. But then she muttered something under her breath, so quietly I almost missed it entirely. I told him she shouldn't come to this. Him, my father. The words sent ice water through my veins. That night, sleep was absolutely impossible. I lay in my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling and counting the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck there when I was 10 years old. At 2 a.m, I gave up completely and pulled up my father's obituary on my phone, reading it for what felt like the 100th time since he died 5 days ago. It listed me as his only child in plain black letters. Survived by his loving wife and daughter. I refreshed the page out of pure habit, not expecting anything to change. That's when I saw it. A new comment at the bottom, posted just minutes ago according to the timestamp. You forgot one daughter. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought they might actually crack. I took a screenshot with trembling hands, worried the comment might mysteriously disappear. By the time I woke up the next morning around 8, the comment had 23 replies. By noon, it had over 100. People from our small town were sharing it, dissecting it, spreading it like wildfire through dry grass in summer. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from friends and acquaintances. Everyone asking, is this real? Who is this person? Are you okay? What's happening? I found my mother in her study at 3 in the afternoon, staring at her laptop with wild, frightened eyes I'd never seen in her before. When she saw me standing in the doorway watching her, she slammed the laptop shut so hard I heard something crack inside it. This is getting completely out of hand, she said. Her voice was sharp, brittle, balanced on the edge of breaking entirely. Someone's trying to destroy this family's reputation. Someone's attacking us. I wanted to ask who she thought it was, but somewhere deep in my gut, I was starting to think I already knew the answer, and it absolutely terrified me. The next afternoon, I looked out my bedroom window and my breath caught sharply in my throat. Tessa stood outside our front gate, hands buried deep in her coat pockets, breath making small visible clouds in the cold February air. She looked lost and determined at the exact same time. I ran downstairs and outside before I could change my mind or talk myself out of it. Up close, standing just inches apart, the resemblance was even more shocking than it had been in the chapel. We could have been identical twins separated at birth, perfect mirror images of the same person. I'm sorry for your loss, she said softly, and her voice even sounded eerily like mine. He was my father, too. The words should have shocked me completely, but somehow they didn't. They felt almost inevitable. Before I could respond or process what she'd said, she pulled something from her coat pocket. An old photograph, edges worn soft with years of careful handling. It showed my father decades younger, smiling in a way I rarely saw him smile, holding a tiny baby in his arms. A baby that definitely wasn't me. This isn't real, I whispered, but my voice had absolutely no conviction behind it. Tessa flipped the photo over with gentle, careful fingers. Written on the back in my father's distinctive handwriting was, Tessa, 6 months old. The date written underneath made my stomach drop like a stone down a deep well. 1 year before I was born. 1 year before I even existed in this world. My mother's voice cut through the moment like a sharp knife through silk. Get off my property right now. She stood on the porch, shaking with a rage I'd never witnessed in her before, not even during her worst arguments with my father. You're a liar, a con artist. Get out before I call the police. Tessa backed away slowly, fear crossing her features. But before she left, she pressed the photograph firmly into my hand and whispered urgently, Find me when you're ready for the truth. Then she was gone, leaving me standing there with proof of a life I never knew existed. That night, strange sounds woke me from restless half-sleep around 2 a.m. I crept to the top of the stairs and peered down into the darkness below, my heart pounding loudly in my ears. Light spilled from under my mother's study door like a warning beacon cutting through the darkness. I tiptoed down the hallway in bare feet, careful to avoid the creaky floorboards I'd memorized as a sneaking teenager, and pressed my ear against the cold wood of the door. I heard the unmistakable crackle of paper burning, accompanied by my mother's ragged, uneven breathing. Through the crack between the door and the frame, I could see her clearly. She stood hunched over a metal wastebasket, feeding papers to the flames one by one with shaking hands. Page after page after page, each one curling black before crumbling to ash. The orange light flickered across her face, making her look like a complete stranger. "You'll ruin everything," she muttered to herself in a voice I barely recognized as hers. Her face was wet with tears that caught the firelight. "Everything I built, everything I sacrificed for, everything I protected all these years from people who wanted to destroy it." She looked nothing like the composed, perfect woman who'd greeted mourners that afternoon with such grace. She looked absolutely terrified and desperate and guilty of something terrible. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding so loud I was absolutely sure she'd hear it and catch me spying. I made it back to my room and locked the door with shaking hands, then sat on my bed trembling. Something was very, very wrong, and my mother was destroying the evidence before anyone could find it and expose whatever she was hiding. I contacted Tessa through social media the next morning, my fingers hovering over the keyboard for 10 minutes before I found the courage to actually type anything. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop across town, far away from prying eyes and gossiping neighbors who knew my face. "I need to know the truth," I told her the moment I sat down across from her, skipping any pretense of small talk or pleasantries. She nodded slowly, understanding completely in her eyes. "So do I. I've been looking for answers my whole life." I pulled out a small plastic bag containing a few strands of my hair that I'd carefully collected that morning. For a DNA test, to prove it one way or another. Tessa's eyes widened with surprise, then filled with something that looked like desperate hope. She smiled sadly and added her own hair to the bag, our strands mixing together inside the plastic. We sent them to a lab that same day, paying extra for the fastest possible results they could provide. But keeping secrets in a small house is absolutely impossible, especially from a mother who's already paranoid about everything. 2 days later, my mother confronted me in the kitchen while I was making breakfast. "I saw the charge on the credit card. You sent away a DNA test. You've been checking my accounts." I couldn't believe it, even though I probably should have expected exactly this. "I'm protecting you," she shouted, her voice rising to a pitch I'd rarely heard from her. "That woman is trying to take everything from us, from you. Can't you see what she's doing?" "Maybe I want the truth more than I want everything else," I said quietly but firmly. Her hand connected with my cheek before I even saw it coming. The slap echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. We both froze, shocked into complete statue stillness. She'd never hit me before, not once in 23 years, not ever. I threw myself into packing up my father's belongings, desperate for distraction from the red handprint still burning on my cheek hours later. His home office had always been strictly off-limits when he was alive, a sacred private space we didn't dare enter without permission. Now it felt like a museum dedicated to a stranger's life, full of artifacts from someone I was beginning to realize I'd never really known at all. I pulled books off shelves, emptied desk drawers full of old pens and faded receipts, sorted through decades of papers and business cards. That's when I noticed it. One section of floorboard didn't sit quite flush with the others, raised just slightly like a secret wanting desperately to be found. I pried it up with a letter opener from his desk, my hands shaking with anticipation. Underneath, in a hollow space someone had carefully carved out years ago, was an envelope yellow with age, written across the front in my father's careful, precise handwriting, to my girls. Girls, plural. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. Inside was a letter dated 2 years ago, and a small brass key attached to a numbered tag. The letter started, "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry I didn't have the courage to tell you everything while I was alive, and could face the consequences. I was a coward who chose comfort over honesty every single time. He confessed to living 2 separate lives in 2 separate towns 30 miles apart, to loving 2 women who never knew about each other until it was far, far too late, to fathering 2 daughters he'd never had the strength or courage to bring together the way he absolutely should have. "Your mother knows the truth," the letter said in closing. "She's known for years. Please forgive me for being too weak to make it right." I read those words over and over until they burned into my brain. The key had a number stamped on it in fatting ink, 247. It took me 3 days of searching online and driving around to different facilities to find the storage place. It was tucked an hour outside our town, hidden behind a dying strip mall that looked like it hadn't seen better days in decades. Unit 247 was in the back corner, covered in dust. The door rolled up with a metallic groan that echoed through the empty hallway. Inside were boxes stacked floor to ceiling, dozens of them, all carefully labeled in my father's neat, methodical handwriting that I knew so well. I started opening them one by one, my hands trembling with each new discovery. Account ledgers showing years of financial transactions, property titles with addresses I didn't recognize, photographs of people and places I'd never seen in my entire life. One photo stopped me cold and stole the breath from my lungs completely. It showed my father with 2 women, both impossibly young, both smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. One was my mother, barely out of her teens with long hair I'd only seen in old photographs. The other must have been Tessa's mother, beautiful and laughing genuinely. They stood on either side of him at some kind of party or celebration, arms linked together like close friends, genuinely happy. They'd known each other, before everything fell apart, before the lies began piling up. I sat down on the cold concrete floor of that storage unit and cried until I couldn't breathe anymore, until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen, and I had absolutely nothing left inside me. Among the boxes, buried beneath years of paperwork, I found business documents that made my stomach turn completely over. My father had owned a small construction company. Everyone in town knew that. It was the respectable family business he'd built from nothing over decades of hard work. What I didn't know was that he'd owned a second company too, a property management business registered under a completely different name. Tessa's mother's name. I pulled out the most recent financial statement with shaking hands. The company was still active, still generating steady income, still worth over $400,000. Properties scattered across 2 counties, rental income flowing in every single month like clockwork. Money my mother had never mentioned to me, money she'd kept hidden and secret. I took photos of everything with my phone, my hands shaking so badly, some of the pictures came out blurry and unfocused. Then I called Tessa immediately. "Did your mother ever talk about a business with my father?" I asked without any preamble or greeting. "She managed some rental properties for him," Tessa said slowly, carefully. "Why are you asking me this?" "Because I think she still owned half of them when she died, and I think someone's been deliberately hiding that from you all these years." The line went silent for a long moment. When Tessa spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "Who would do that?" I closed my eyes and said the words that tasted like poison in my mouth. "My mother." The lawyer arrived on a Tuesday afternoon 3 days later. I watched from my bedroom window as he walked up our front path, briefcase in hand, shoulders squared like he was preparing for battle with an opponent. My mother answered the door. I couldn't hear the conversation from upstairs, but I saw her face change in real time. Shock melting into fury, melting into something that looked like pure panic spreading across her features. She slammed the door in his face, hard enough to rattle the windows throughout the house. I ran downstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time. What did he want? Nothing important. Just another scammer trying to take advantage of grieving families who can't think straight. But I'd already slipped out the side door while she was talking. The lawyer was getting into his car, and I caught him before he could drive away, waving my arms frantically to get his attention. "Wait, please wait." He stopped and handed me his business card with raised eyebrows. Your father's estate has a supplemental will that needs to be executed legally. Your mother was notified months ago, but she's been refusing to participate in the official reading. What's in it? My heart was racing now, pounding against my ribs. He looked at me carefully, measuring his words precisely. I can't discuss specific details without all parties present, but I'd strongly suggest you attend the official reading. You have a legal right to know what your father actually wanted. He drove away, leaving me standing alone in the driveway with his card clutched in my hand like a lifeline I desperately needed. That night, memories flooded back like a dam breaking completely. Pieces I'd never connected before suddenly fitting together into a terrible, horrifying picture. I remembered being 7 years old, asking innocently why Daddy was always gone on business trips that lasted for days. My mother had snapped at me so harshly I'd burst into tears and hidden in my room for hours. Never ask questions about your father's work. Do you understand me? Never. I remembered being 12, hearing my father sobbing in his study late one night. I'd pressed my ear to the door, confused and scared, not understanding why grown men cried like that. My mother had found me listening and dragged me roughly back to bed by my arm. He's under stress from work. Don't bother him with your nosy questions. I remembered being 16, finding a birthday card hidden in his jacket pocket when I was looking for lunch money. It said "Happy Birthday" with a cartoon cake, signed "Love Always, Dad" in his handwriting. I'd been thrilled thinking he'd bought it early for me, but my birthday was in March. This card was dated September, 4 months before mine would arrive. My mother had found me holding it, reading it with a confused smile. She'd grabbed it from my hands and torn it into tiny pieces right in front of me. This was for a client's daughter. Stop snooping through things. Mind your own business, Vero. I'd been trained my entire life not to ask questions, not to dig deeper, not to see what was right in front of my face the whole time. The email arrived on a gray Thursday morning that felt like the end of the world. Subject: DNA test results confidential. I stared at my phone screen for a full minute before I could make my fingers open it, my heart hammering against my ribs. The report loaded slowly on my phone, line by line. Charts and numbers and scientific terminology I barely understood filled the screen. But one number stood out, bold and undeniable in a box at the top: 99.8% probability of half-sibling relationship. Tessa was my sister, not maybe, not possibly, definitely, scientifically, undeniably. I sat on the edge of my bed and cried tears I didn't know I had left inside me. Not sad tears this time, angry tears, betrayed tears, tears for the childhood that had been built on a lie so massive and all-consuming it had swallowed everything real and true. I called Tessa with shaking hands. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting by her phone. The results came, I said simply. I know, I got them too. She was crying, I could hear it clearly in her voice. We're sisters, she whispered like a prayer or a confession. We're sisters, I repeated. And somehow, despite everything broken and terrible and wrong, that felt like the only true thing in my entire life. I invited my mother to dinner at a restaurant downtown 2 days later. Neutral territory where she couldn't scream or destroy things or hit me again without witnesses watching. She arrived perfectly dressed as always, makeup flawless, acting like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't been lying to me for 23 years straight. Like our entire life together wasn't built on sand that was washing away. We ordered food neither of us would eat, made awkward small talk about the weather and nothing important. Then I placed the DNA results on the table between us, the paper seeming to glow in the dim restaurant light. She stared at it like it was a poisonous snake about to strike at her throat. Say something, I demanded when the silence stretched too long and became unbearable. Her face hardened into something cold and unfamiliar, someone I didn't recognize at all anymore. You think you know everything now? You think you understand what I went through? I understand you lied to me every single day of my life. She leaned forward across the table, voice low and absolutely venomous. "You have no idea what that man did to me, how he humiliated me in this town, how he made me look like a complete fool in front of everyone while he played house with that woman in another town. So you just erased her, erased Tessa, made me think I was an only child my entire life. I gave you a normal life." She was shaking now, hands trembling around her water glass. "I protected you from his mess, from his mistakes, from the shame of it all. You protected yourself and your reputation. You never thought about what I needed or deserved." She stood up so fast her chair fell backward with a crash that made the entire restaurant go quiet and stare. "You're just like him, selfish, ungrateful, throwing everything away." She grabbed her purse and stormed out, leaving me alone with cold food, hot tears, and the stares of 50 strangers who just witnessed my family fall apart completely. Tessa and I met at a park the next day, sitting on a bench away from everyone, shoulders touching, watching kids play on the swings in the distance. She told me her story in a quiet voice that shook with old pain that had never healed properly. Her mother had been young when she met my father, barely 22 years old. She'd worked as his secretary at the construction company. The affair started slowly, cautiously, then all at once like a wildfire consuming everything in its path. "He promised he'd leave his wife," Tessa said quietly, staring at her hands in her lap. "He promised for 13 years straight, said he was just waiting for the right time, that he didn't want to hurt anyone unnecessarily." Her mother had believed him until the day she died of cancer 3 years ago. My father had paid for the entire funeral but hadn't attended, claiming a sudden business emergency. "She died still loving him," Tessa said, and her voice cracked completely. "Still believing he'd meant everything he'd said, still hoping he'd show up one day and finally make everything right." "I'm so sorry," I whispered, and I meant it with my whole heart and soul. "The worst part?" She turned to look at me with eyes that mirrored mine exactly. "I have nothing left of him except memories and old photographs. Your mother made sure of that. She has the house, all the money, the business, everything that should have been split." I thought about those property documents hidden in the storage unit. Maybe not everything. Word spread through our small town, like a disease you couldn't cure or contain. Someone had posted about the DNA results online, probably someone who'd seen us at the coffee shop or overheard whispers at the restaurant. Small towns are absolutely terrible at keeping secrets, especially the juicy, scandalous ones. Suddenly, I was the center of a scandal I hadn't asked for and didn't want. At the grocery store, women I'd known my whole life whispered behind their hands when I walked past their carts. At church on Sunday, people stared openly and stopped talking when I came near their groups. On social media, the gossip was absolutely vicious, people saying horrible things they'd never dare say to my face. But my mother played her role perfectly, like the accomplished actress she'd always been. She posted a long, emotional message on social media, painting herself as the innocent victim of a cruel extortion scheme. "A young woman is claiming to be my late husband's daughter, trying to steal what my daughter rightfully inherited. Please pray for our family during this difficult time." The comments were brutal and immediate. People called Tessa a gold digger, a liar, an opportunist, and far worse things I couldn't bring myself to read completely. I tried to defend her, posting the truth, but my mother's friends were too numerous, too loud, too convinced of her complete innocence. In my own home, surrounded by people I'd known forever, I'd somehow become the outsider looking in from the cold. I found the metal box while cleaning out the garage on a Saturday afternoon, desperate for something productive to do with my restless hands. It was small, dented, hidden behind old paint cans and forgotten gardening tools in a corner thick with cobwebs and dust. Inside were cassette tapes, 5 of them, each labeled with a date in my father's handwriting. I hadn't seen a cassette player in years, but I found one at a thrift store downtown. That night, alone in my room with the door locked, I played the first tape with trembling hands. My father's voice filled the room, and I nearly dropped the player in shock. "If anyone finds these recordings, I want them to know the complete truth," he said. His voice was tired, sad, weighted down with heavy regret. I loved 2 women in my life. I fathered 2 daughters, and I was too much of a coward to be honest with any of them about it. He talked about Tessa's mother and how the affair had started as a drunken mistake at an office party, but became something deeper, something real and meaningful. About my mother finding out when I was only 3 years old. She gave me an ultimatum, he said, and I could hear him crying on the tape. Leave them both or she'd take Vero and I'd never see her again. She'd make sure of it through the courts. So I chose. God help me, I chose my legitimate family. But he'd never really left them. He'd just hidden better, lied more carefully, built a second life in the shadows. The last tape was the hardest to hear. If you're listening to this, then I'm gone. And your mother has probably destroyed my real will by now. Don't let her win, girls. Don't let the lies continue after I'm gone. The lawyer found me at a coffee shop 3 days later. He slid into the booth across from me without asking permission, and I nearly spilled my drink all over the table. Your mother filed a restraining order against me yesterday, he said quietly, looking around nervously. But I have something you absolutely need to see before it's too late. He pulled out a folder from his briefcase. Inside was a will, official and properly notarized. My father's real will. He came to me 6 months before he died, the lawyer explained, speaking quickly and quietly. Said he needed to make things right before it was too late. This will splits all assets equally between you and Tessa, including the property business. Then why doesn't Tessa have anything? I was genuinely confused. Because your mother submitted a different will to probate court, an older one from 15 years ago, and she did it fast, before anyone could question it or contest it properly through legal channels. That's illegal, isn't it? It's fraud, he corrected me seriously, his face grave. But proving it in court is extremely difficult without solid evidence that can't be disputed. I thought about those boxes in the storage unit, about the business documents showing Tessa's mother's name, about the tapes with my father's confession recorded in his own voice. I have evidence, I said confidently, lots of it. My extended family was holding a memorial event at the community center. A celebration of my father's life, they were calling it, complete with photo displays and memory sharing. I arrived late, clutching a portable speaker in my hands like a weapon I was preparing to use. My mother stood at the front of the room, telling carefully edited stories about their marriage, making him sound like a devoted husband and saint, making herself sound like the perfect, loyal wife who'd stood by him through everything difficult. I walked to the front, my heart pounding. I have something to share with everyone. She tried to stop me, reaching for my arm, but I was already plugging in the speaker, already pressing play on the recording I'd transferred to my phone. My father's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable to everyone who knew him. My wife knew about my other daughter. She's known for years, but she made me hide it, made me choose between them. And when I died, she forged a will to keep Tessa from getting what was rightfully hers. She's not the victim here. She's the keeper of lies. She's the one who destroyed 2 families to protect her image. The room erupted, gasps, shouts, chairs scraping backward. My mother's face went from pale to scarlet to purple in seconds. That's not real, she screamed, lunging toward me across the room. She faked it. She's trying to destroy me. But everyone could hear it was his voice, undeniably, unmistakably his. My mother's breakdown was spectacular and terrible to witness. She lunged at me across the room, screaming that I'd destroyed her reputation forever, that I'd ruined everything she'd spent decades carefully building, that she'd sacrificed everything imaginable for me. I gave you a perfect life, she shrieked, her face twisted with rage. A perfect family, a perfect image, and you threw it all away for some stranger you barely know. She's not a stranger, I shouted back. She's my sister. You don't have a sister, you only have me. But the crowd had already turned against her completely. People were leaving quickly, whispering to each other, staring at her with disgust or pity or both. The perfect image she'd built for decades crumbled in minutes. I looked around frantically for Tessa. She stood near the door, tears streaming down her face. When our eyes met, I saw her turn and walk out. I caught up with her in the parking lot, grabbing her arm. "Please don't go." "I can't do this anymore, Vero," she sobbed. "I just wanted to know my father. I didn't want to destroy anyone's life or cause all this pain." "You didn't destroy anything. She did this to herself." But Tessa was already getting in her car, already driving away into the evening darkness. And I stood there in the empty parking lot, wondering if justice was worth the cost of everything. I discovered the auction listing completely, by accident a week later. One of my father's old business partners called me, confused and concerned. "Your mom's selling the commercial properties? That seems awfully fast. Is everything okay?" I pulled up the real estate website with shaking hands. Sure enough, 3 properties were listed for immediate sale. Properties that, according to the real will, should have been split between Tessa and me. My mother was liquidating assets as fast as she could before the truth could come out completely. I called the lawyer immediately, my voice shaking. "Can she do that? Just sell everything?" "Technically, as the executor of the estate, she has legal authority to manage assets. But if we can prove fraud, we can freeze the sales before they go through." "How long will that take?" "Not long, but we need to file emergency papers today, right now." We made it to the courthouse 30 minutes before closing time. The emergency injunction was granted. All asset sales were frozen immediately pending a full investigation. My mother called me that night, and I'd never heard her voice shake like that. "You just destroyed your inheritance. You know that, right? You'll get nothing now." "No," I said calmly, surprising myself. "I saved it. I saved what's actually mine." The final confrontation happened in the house where I'd grown up, surrounded by memories that no longer felt real. My mother sat in the living room, surrounded by old photo albums spread across the coffee table. Pictures of our family, our perfect, fake, carefully constructed family. "Why did you do it?" I asked simply, sitting across from her. She looked up at me with hollow, exhausted eyes. "Because if he hadn't cheated, none of this would have happened. Everything was absolutely perfect before her mother came along." "You mean before Tessa was born?" "Before any of them." She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. "I was his first love, his wife, the mother of his legitimate child, but he threw all of that away for some secretary." "So you spent 20 years pretending she didn't exist?" "I spent 20 years protecting you." She stood up, shaking with emotion. "Do you know what it's like? Everyone knowing your husband was unfaithful, everyone pitying you behind your back. I made absolutely sure you never felt that shame. You just made sure I never knew the truth about who I really am." "Same thing." I looked at her, this woman who'd raised me and fed me and tucked me into bed, and felt nothing but deep sadness. "No, Mom, it's really, really not the same thing at all." I walked out of that house and didn't look back, leaving her alone with her photo albums and lies. The investigation moved quickly once the legal wheels started turning. The forged will was surprisingly easy to prove. My mother had taken an old document from 15 years ago and altered the date. A forensic document examiner confirmed it was fake in 48 hours. The lawyer filed formal charges: fraud, forgery, obstruction of justice. Local news picked up the story first, then regional news, then it spread across social media like wildfire. "Wid, accused of forging will to cheat daughter out of inheritance." Someone made it into a viral thread. Then a true crime podcast picked it up and did a whole episode. My mother's carefully constructed image crumbled in days, falling apart like a house of cards in a strong wind. She lost her position at the country club, lost most of her friends, lost the respect she'd spent decades building brick by brick. I felt no satisfaction watching it happen, just bone-deep exhaustion that made me want to sleep for years. Tessa called me one evening while I sat alone in my apartment. "I saw the news coverage. Are you okay?" "I honestly don't know what I am anymore. I'm sorry this got so big and public." "Don't be sorry. The truth needed to come out, no matter how ugly it got." But at what cost to you? I didn't have an answer that made any sense. 3 months later, Tessa and I sat in the lawyer's office, signing papers that would change everything. The estate had been redistributed according to my father's real will, split 50-50 down the middle, fair and equal. We'd made a decision together. Instead of keeping everything, we'd convert the properties into a community foundation, low-income housing with affordable rent. We'd name it after my father, not to honor him particularly, but to remind ourselves that something good could come from something completely broken. "This is really happening," Tessa said, staring at the document spread before us. "Yeah, it really is." After the lawyer left us alone to review everything one final time, we sat in comfortable silence. "I have a brother," Tessa said suddenly, breaking the silence. "He's 15. I never told you because I didn't want to complicate things even more." "I have a brother." My voice came out higher than I expected. She smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes completely. "Half-brother, technically. My mom had him a few years before she died. Different father entirely. Can I meet him sometime?" "He'd really like that. He's been asking about you constantly." And just like that, my family grew. Not smaller like I'd feared, but bigger and fuller. 6 months later, I stood at my father's grave with Tessa beside me on a crisp autumn morning. We'd brought the old photograph with us, the one that had started everything, that had cracked open my entire world like an egg. But this time, we stood together in front of the headstone and took a new picture. Same pose as the old one, different people. Sisters who'd found each other despite everything designed to keep us apart. "Do you forgive him?" Tessa asked quietly, staring at his name carved deep in granite. I thought about it for a long time, really considered the question honestly. "I don't know yet. Maybe someday, but not today. But I forgive you for existing, if that makes any sense at all." She laughed, a real laugh that sounded like freedom and relief. "That's the strangest and sweetest thing anyone's ever said to me." "I just mean, I'm glad you found me, even though it destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life." "Me too. I'm glad we found each other." I pulled the house key from my pocket. The key to the home I'd grown up in, the place where I'd been lied to for 23 years. My mother still lived there, alone now, refusing to speak to me or acknowledge what she'd done. I placed the key carefully on top of my father's headstone, right next to a fresh bouquet of white flowers someone had left. "What's that for?" Tessa asked, watching me curiously. "It's me walking away from secrets, from lies, from a perfect life that was never actually real." I stepped back and took a deep breath of clean air. I don't need that house or those memories anymore. I have something better now. "What's that?" "The truth, and a sister who understands." We left the key there on the gravestone, glinting in the morning sun, and walked away together toward the parking lot. 2 sisters, finally completely free.